All right, good morning. Turn to 1 Samuel chapter 5. Here, I'll give this to you. Don't mind. It came with this too. Just to recap for a couple who may have not been here last week. Last week we covered chapters 3 and 4. And if you remember, in chapter 3, Samuel is a young boy and he's called to be a prophet by God. And then in chapter 4 is the narrative of the battle between the Israelites and the Philistines. And we talked about how oftentimes they didn't have a reason for going to battle. It really was just because they felt like going to battle. And we're not given the reason as to why they went to war. But they went to war, and the first time they go, they lose 3,000 people. And you remember they're very rejected and dejected, and they're asking God, why did you allow this to happen? And they say, let's go and fix this, and we'll go get the Ark of the Covenant over this in Shiloh. And they bring that onto the battlefield, thinking it'll help. And the Philistines, remember, are very dejected at first. They think the Ark of the Covenant is a god in and of itself, because that's how they operate in their mindset. But they rally and they say, act like men, fight lest we become slaves, and they win. They defeat the Israelites, 30,000 slaughtered. 30,000 soldiers slaughtered by the Philistines, and the Ark of God was taken. So for the very first time in the history of the Ark and the history of the Jewish people do not have the Ark of the Covenant in their own hands. And not only is it missing, it is in the hand of the pagan Philistines. So that's where we were in chapter 4, and let's pick up in chapter 5. Keep in mind, chapter divisions are artificial. Don't let them distract you. Read it in a continuous flow. Chapter 5, verse 1. Now the Philistines took the ark of God and brought it from Ebenezer to Ashdod. Then the Philistines took the ark of God and brought it to the house of Dagon, and they set it by Dagon. So the Philistines, remember, they camped out in Ashdod when they were in battle. The Israelites camped out not Ashdod, Ebenezer. They camped out in Ebenezer when they were in battle. They defeat the Israelites. They take the ark back to their God's house, Dagon. This was a common thing that you would have done if you were living in the ancient time. When people or people groups would conquer and defeat other people groups, they would often take something that resembled their God and they would bring it back to the house of their own God. And it was their way of ascribing God's superiority, military superiority, in a way of saying, our God has granted us defeat, and now we have your God in the house of our God. In Daniel chapter 1, Nebuchadnezzar, when he ravages the temple, he takes the vessels of the house of the temple and brings them, it says, to, quote, the treasury of his God. And then fast forward in Daniel in chapter 5, King Belshazzar, who was very likely the grandson of Nebuchadnezzar. We often think he was the son of Nebuchadnezzar. He was probably the grandson of King Nebuchadnezzar. And he throws this wild, drunken party, you remember. And one of the things he does is he brings the vessels from the temple that Nebuchadnezzar had taken, and he drinks them and offer to the god of gold, silver, bronze, iron, and wood. So it really was just a battle of whose god was better. One of the ways they would establish that was by taking the god that they have conquered and bringing it to their house of their god. So the Philistines have the Ark of the Covenant. They take it to the house of Dagon. Dagon was an ancient false god who, you'll be interested to know, he was half fish and half man. Doesn't sound very intimidating, does it? You picture a statue, half fish and half man. But that was the god they worship. If you remember Baal, he was a popular Old Testament false god a lot of the neighboring kingdoms were worshiping. Dagon was said to be the father of the false god Baal. In Judges, it was actually Dagon, if you remember, who the Philistines thanked their god Dagon for delivering Samson into their hands. So Dagon is a very big god in the Philistine mind. And you see here, they bring the ark to the house of Dagon. We keep reading, verse 3. When the Ashdodites arose early the next morning, behold, Dagon had fallen on his face to the ground before the ark of the Lord. A couple of you just walked in, 1 Samuel chapter 5. Dagon had fallen on the ground before the ark of the Lord, and the head of Dagon, Dagon had fallen on his face to the ground before the ark of the Lord. So they took Dagon and set him in his place again. Verse 4. But when they arose early the next morning, behold, Dagon had fallen on his face to the ground before the ark of the Lord. And the head of Dagon and both the palms of his hand were cut off to the threshold. Only the trunk of Dagon was left to him. Therefore neither the priest of Dagon nor all who entered Dagon's house tread on the threshold of Dagon in Ashdod to this day. So you have the Ark of the Covenant in the house of Dagon. They awake one morning and they find the god Dagon on his face before the Ark of God. And what's interesting too is, they're worshiping this god, and it says here, they took Dagon and put him back in his proper place. Because obviously Dagon couldn't have done that himself. But it's funny because here they are worshiping this god and he can't even get up on his own. He falls on his face before the Ark of the Covenant. You would think, figure it out yourself. But no, it says they took Dagon and put him back. They go back the next morning and it happens again. Only this time the god had been cut. The god's head was cut off, as were his hands. And in the ancient days, that was often a sign when you would cut the head off something, was really the final blow of a battle. And David and Goliath, you remember the final blow in that story is when David cuts the head off of Goliath after he killed him. It was the final straw of saying, victory is mine. So Dagon is headless, he's handless. Neither the priest of Dagon nor all who enter his house go there to this day.
Ryan?
Yes?
I get why they cut the head off, but what's up with cutting the hands off?
Yeah, I'm not sure. Yeah, it doesn't say.
I thought you cut the hands off a thief and they stole the ark.
Could be. Could be any reason. Yep. And it was God who did it.
Right.
Yeah, I'm not sure. So think of this from the Philistine perspective. You had just killed 30,000 of these Hebrew soldiers. You have their God in your house. And now all of a sudden, your God, if you're a Philistine, Dagon, is humiliated in your own house by the Ark of the Covenant. Not only that he had fallen on his face before the Ark, but also that now he had been struck by God and with his head cut off. So this would have humiliated the Philistine people. And it really is a lesson that God hates idolatry. He hates it when the people worship what they shouldn't worship. And keep in mind, the standard of the law of God applies just as much to the Philistines as it does to the Israelites. Though the Israelites are the people of God, God's law is universal and it applies to everyone. And Paul makes that clear in Romans. If you remember that in Romans, Paul said the law of God, though it not be written for everyone, it's written indeed on the hearts of the people. So the Philistines are under the same law of God to not have idols. We are all created to worship the living God, and when we don't, we substitute that to worship something else, and that's what the Philistines were doing. I love the way Isaiah says it. Isaiah 42, and this is God speaking. I am the Lord, that is my name. I will not give my glory to another, nor my praise to graven images. And it really raises a question that's worth considering on the nature of idols itself. I mentioned last week, we are designed and created by God to worship Him. But because of our sin, we often don't. Because we're sinners, because of the world we live in the fallen world, we often don't worship God. And when we trade in worshiping God, we worship something else. That's what Paul says in Romans 1. Remember? They worship the creature rather than the creator, and seeking to be wise in doing that, we become fools because we trade in the worship of the living God for something else. We have our own problems in the 21st century Western world. We don't fall on our knees to graven images, but we have our own idols, right? Money, status, sex, toys, material goods, whatever it is. And that's a conversation worth having. But I'm talking today about idolatry in the sense that we typically understand it of an actual graven image that we would bow our knee to. And again, we don't really do that here, but there are parts of the world, even today, where that's done. You go to India, thousands of Hindus to this day do that. And for most of human history, that's how the practice of idolatry would work. I want to read Isaiah 44. You can turn there if you want. Turn to Isaiah 44, And listen to how God describes this practice of idolatry. Isaiah 44, verse 9. Those who fashion a graven image are all of them futile, and their precious things are of no profit. Even their own witnesses fail or see to know, so that they will be put to shame. Who has fashioned a god or cast an idol to no profit? Behold, all his companions will be put to shame. For the craftsmen themselves are mere men. Let them all assemble themselves. Let them stand up. Let them tremble. Let them together be put to shame. Verse 12. The man shapes iron into a cutting tool, and does not work over his coals, fashioning it with hammers and working it with his strong arm. He also gets hungry and his strength fails. He drinks no water and becomes weary. Another shaped wood. He extends a measuring line. He outlines it with red chalk. He works it with planes and outlines, and it with a compass, and makes it like the form of a man, like the beauty of a man, so that it may sit in a house. Surely he cuts cedar for himself, and takes a cypress or an oak, and raises it for himself among the trees of the forest. He plants a fir, and the rain makes it grow. Then it becomes something for a man to burn. So he takes one of them and warms himself, and he also makes a fire to bake bread. He also makes a god and worships it. He makes a graven image and falls down before it. Half of it he burns in the fire. The other half he eats a meal as he roasts and is satisfied. He also warms himself and says, Aha, I am warm. I have seen the fire. But the rest of it he makes into a god, his graven image. He falls down before it and worships it. And he also prays to it. And he says, Deliver me, for you are my God. They do not know, nor do they not understand, for he has smeared over their eyes so that they cannot see, and their hearts cannot really comprehend. No one recalls, nor is there knowledge or understanding to say, I have burned half of it in the fire, and also have baked bread over its coals. I roast meat and eat it, then I make the rest into an abomination. I fall down before a block of wood. He feeds on his ashes, a deceived heart turns him aside, and he cannot deliver himself, nor say, Is there not a lie in my right hand? You hear the point that God is trying to make. He's saying, look, when you build an idol, you cut a tree down and you take the wood, you use that wood to make a fire, you use that wood to cook your food, and with that same wood, you build an idol, and then you bow your knee to that idol and say, Deliver me. And the point is, don't you understand how this does not make sense? You hear almost the sarcasm in it. This is the same wood that you cut down from the tree, that you use for other purposes. Now you have made it into a god and you're worshiping it. It's almost, you almost sense that God is laughing at this. The idea that we fall down to idols.
You cut down a tree that I created.
Yeah, right. Yep. The tree that I made.
That's what I heard someone refer to Wiccan, so Wiccan religion as Build-A-God,
Yep.
Build-A-Bear.
Yeah. Yep. And really, it's really the energy of Satan that's behind all of these things. Because from the beginning, Satan had wanted to be a god. Isaiah 14 talks about that when it describes the fall of Satan, and he says, I will be like the Most High. I will do this. I will do that. I will do this. He was no longer content being a reflection of the glory of God. He wanted to be like God. And I think one of the ways he's tried that throughout human history was creating all of these false gods that don't exist, but had deceived thousands, no, billions of people into believing in all of these false gods. All right, back to Samuel. Dagon is humiliated in his own house. Look at verse 6. Now the hand of the Lord was heavy on the Ashdodites. They're in the city of Ashdod. And he ravaged them and smote them with tumors, both Ashdod and its territories. Verse 7. When the men of Ashdod saw it was so, they said, The ark of God of Israel must not remain with us, for his hand is severe on us and on Dagon our God. So they sent and gathered all the lords of the Philistines, and they said, What shall we do with the ark of the God of Israel? And they said, Let the ark of the God of Israel be brought around to Gath. And they brought the ark of the God of Israel around, verse 9. After they had brought it around, the hand of the Lord was against the city, and with very great confusion he smote the men of the city, both young and old, so that the tumors broke out on them. So they sent the ark of God to Ekron. And as the ark of God came into Ekron, the Ekronites cried out, and they said, "They have brought the ark of the God of Israel around to us, to kill us and our people." They sent therefore and gathered all the lords of the Philistines and said, "Send away the ark of God of Israel, and let it return to its own people, so that it will not kill us and our people." For there was deadly confusion throughout the city, and the hand of God was very heavy there. Verse 12, and the men who did not die were smitten with tumors, and the cry went out to heaven. So it's clear that it's originally in the city of Ashdod. It said the Ashdodites were under the judgment of God, and you look at the terminology, he ravished them and he smote them with tumors. They recognize that they're under the judgment of God because they have this thing that does not belong to them that they took. Look at though verse 8. Verse 7, the ark of God must not remain with us, his hand is severe on us. Verse 8, they gathered all the lords of the Philistines and said, "What shall we do with the ark of the God of Israel?" And they said, "Let the ark of the God of Israel be brought around to Gath." They understand something's wrong, but it's interesting because they know they can't treat this flippantly. If it was as simple as getting rid of this thing, they would have done that. But they knew they were dealing with a holy object. These were very religious people. They knew they couldn't just flippantly decide to do one thing or another. They had to treat this carefully lest they make things worse. So they said, we'll just move it to another city. They bring it to Gath. The same thing happens in Gath. God smites the people there, tumors, ravish the city, and if it doesn't work the first time or the second time, try again. And they bring it to Ekron. Verse 10, they sent the God to Ekron. Only at this time, word had gotten out as to what's going on. It had been trending. Word's going around what's going on. This ark is bad news. So as they're bringing it to this village, this town of Ekron, whatever it is, they run ahead and they said, "Oh, they have brought the ark of God to kill us." They sent therefore and they gathered all the lords of the Philistines, and they said this, "Send away the ark of God of Israel, bring it back to its own place, so that it will not kill us and our people." And the men who did this, who did not die, were smitten with tumors, and the cry went up in the city of heaven. They understand what they have done is wrong, and now they're going to try to make it right and bring back the ark. Does anyone have questions or thoughts?
I think it's interesting that they still continue to worship their god Dagon, even after seeing the power of God.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
Yep. Clearly, their God had been defeated. Yeah. Yep. But I think that's the funny thing with idols is, even though it's going to come to an end, you still follow your idols sometimes.
They're pretty darn stubborn.
It's interesting to remember the Philistines knew the God of Israel was capable of this. In chapter 4, as they're bringing the ark onto the battlefield, what do they say? You remember they said, "This is the God of Israel who smote the Egyptians and ravished them." And that's why they said, "Rally, men of Philistines, fight lest we become their slaves." At first they're fearful. They know what this God is capable of, but they got a little arrogant about it. All right, let's keep reading. Chapter 6. And again, it flows, the story just flows. Chapter 6, verse 1. Now the ark of the Lord had been in the country of the Philistines 7 months. And the Philistines called for the priests and the diviners, saying, "What shall we do with the ark of the Lord? Tell us how we shall send it to its place." And again, it wasn't just a matter of let's just send it back, bring it over there. We want to do this carefully, lest we upset this God even further. Verse 3, they said, "If you send away the ark of God of Israel, do not send it empty, but you shall surely return to him a guilt offering." then you will be healed, and it will be known to you why his hand is not removed from you. So they get together all these diviners, these priests, and the priests say, look, if you decide to send the ark back, do that, but don't send it back alone. Send it back with a guilt offering to appease the God of Israel for angering him. You have angered him. You have sinned against him. Now you need to appease his wrath. Send back something there. Verse 4. Then they said, what shall be the guilt offering which we return to him? And they said, 5 golden tumors and 5 golden mice, according to the number of the lords of the Philistines. For 1 plague was on all of you and on your lords. So you shall make the likeness of your tumors and the likeness of your mice that ravage the land, and you shall give glory to the God of Israel. Perhaps he will ease his hand from you, your gods and your land. Why then do you harden your hearts as the Egyptians and Pharaoh hardened their hearts? When he had severely dealt with them, did they not allow the people to go, and they departed? So, send them a guilt offering. What's the offering going to be? And this is what they come up with. 5 golden mice and 5 golden tumors. Why the tumors? Because they were stricken with tumors, so they're going to make 5 golden tumors in the likeness of whatever that tumor looked like. Whatever it was, it probably wasn't appeasing. And then golden mice, because it says the mice had ravaged the land. So indication being it may have been the mice that brought in this plague, whatever it was, right?
Yeah, the NIV says rats. So.
Yeah, yep. This was the Philistines' way of communicating to Israel and to the God of Israel. We understand what we have done. We understand that these tumors are from you. We're here to appease you with these golden images here. It is interesting to note that in terms of appeasing God, as to how God himself spells out how it is to be done, they completely get it wrong. We don't expect them to get it right because they're pagan Philistines. They have no knowledge of the Old Testament law, no knowledge of the Torah, no knowledge as to how to get it right. But just for an example, as to how they mess it up. But they're going on good faith. That's the key. They don't know how to do it in terms of the law, but they're going on good faith and saying, let's do something to appease the God of Israel. But for example, Leviticus 5 makes it clear that if you want to make a guilt offering to Yahweh, you have to slay a ram. And they don't slay a ram. They probably don't know that they have to slay a ram. In verse 2, in the 10 Commandments, in Deuteronomy 5, God forbids any making of any sort of statue of likeness of a man or an animal. So they make statues of likeness in terms of a mice and a rat. And then not only do they make a statue of an animal, but they choose a rat, which Leviticus 11 calls an unclean animal. And all of these suggestions were made by the Philistine priests, or what's called diviners. God says something about that in the Torah when he talks to his people in Israel. He said, look, you are going to be surrounded by all of these people groups who have these diviners or these priests. And he said, you, Israel, have nothing to do with that. You listen to the prophets I have given you. You listen to the priest of Aaron. You have nothing to do with all of these pagan, diviner, wise men sort of deal. You know, don't listen to them. But again, we expect this from the Philistines. They're operating out of the best faith they know how. And again, here's that reference in verse 7 to the Egyptians. Why then do you harden your hearts as the Egyptians and Pharaoh hardened their hearts when he had severely dealt with them? Did they not allow the people to go, and they departed? It's in essence saying, act now, do this now, don't delay. Don't delay like the Pharaoh delayed. He kept delaying, and in turn, hardening his own heart to the point where he brought the judgment of God on himself. So that's how they're going to do it. Verse 7. Now therefore take and prepare a new cart and 2 milch cows on which there has never been a yoke. And hitch the cows to the cart and take their calves home away from them. Take the ark of the Lord and place it on the cart, and put the articles of gold which you return to him as a guilt offering in a box by its side. Then send it away that it may go. Watch, if it goes up by the way of its own territory to Beth Shemesh. Beth Shemesh is the Jewish territory. Then he had done this great evil. But if not, then we will know that it was not his hand that struck us. It happened to us by chance. So here's the plan. This is the plan that diviners are giving them. My translation says this. It says, now build a cart and find 2 cows. Well, I'm sorry, it says 2 milch cows in which there had never been a yoke. The New Living Translation says, build a new cart, find 2 cows that have just given birth, and make sure the cows have never been yoked to a cart. So their plan is to put the Ark of the Covenant on a cart, which again is wrong because the Old Testament said the Ark of the Covenant should never ride on a cart. It needs to be carried, but they don't know that. But they're going to put the Ark of the Covenant on a cart. They're going to take cows that have just given birth to baby calves and have never been trained to pull a cart, and they're going to let it go. And these Philistine diviners are saying, if the cows take the cart all the way to Beth Shemesh, then we know that this was the doing of God. But in the more likely case, if the cows veer off because they have never been trained to pull a cart, or even more likely, if the cows turn around to go back to their new calves off of their maternal instincts, then we'll conclude that this was not God and this was all coincidence. That's their plan. Not a bad plan. Give them credit. Again, they're operating out of the best way they know how to do it. Verse 10. Then the men did so, and they took 2 milch cows and hitched them to the cart and shut their calves at home. They put the ark of the Lord on the cart and the box with the golden mice and the likeness of their tumors. Verse 12. And the cows took the straight way in the direction of Beth Shemesh. They went along the highway, lowing as they went, and did not turn aside to the right or to the left. And the lords of the Philistines followed them to the border of Beth Shemesh. So the plan works. It concludes what they had thought all along, that they were indeed under the judgment of God. Their plan worked. The cows take them all the way to Beth Shemesh. Beth Shemesh is a Jewish area, and it literally means house of sun. Beth, means house, right? Bethlehem, house of bread. Beth is always the house of something. Verse 13. Now the people of Beth Shemesh were reaping their wheat harvest in the valley, and they raised their eyes and saw the ark and were glad to see it. No doubt they were glad to see it. This thing had been gone at least 7 months, maybe more. And again, this was the first time it happened. And you were not able really to worship Yahweh in the sense. The high priest was not able to go in to the ark and sacrifice on the mercy seat on a once a year. It really had destroyed their ability to communicate and worship with Yahweh, with the ark being gone. So they were glad to see it. Verse 14. The cart came into the field of Joshua the Beth-Shemite and stood there where there was a large stone. And they split the wood of the cart and offered the cows as a burnt offering to the Lord. Verse 15, the Levites took down the ark of the Lord and the box that was with it, in which were the articles of gold, and put them on a large stone. And the men of Beth Shemesh offered burnt offerings and sacrifices that day to the Lord. When the 5 lords of the Philistines saw it, they returned to Ekron that day. So it works. They bring the ark, they remove the ark, put it on a large stone, and they sacrifice in thanks to God. Verse 15 is important. The Levites were the only ones allowed to touch the Ark of the Covenant. The Ark of the Covenant could only be touched and handled by the descendants of Aaron on the priesthood. They were the only ones allowed to touch it. Judges and Numbers tell us that the town of Beth Shemesh was very likely filled with Levites. It was really a training center, so to speak, for a Levite to live there, worship, and to handle the ark. Verse 17. These are the golden tumors which the Philistines returned for a guilt offering to the Lord. 1 for Ashdod, 1 for Gaza, 1 for Ashkelon, 1 for Gath, and 1 for Ekron, and the golden mice according to the number of all the cities of the Philistines belonging to the 5 lords, both of the fortified cities and of the country villages. The large stone on which they set the ark is a witness to this day in the field of Joshua the Beth-Shemite. And anytime we read that phrase, to this day, that is always in reference to the day or the time that the book was written. And we talked when we mentioned this earlier that we're not exactly sure when this book was written. We can make educated guesses as to a time period. And I think one of our best educated guesses is sometime after the split of the kingdom, because the author and the narrator seem to make reference to the two separate kingdoms. Looking for one of my other papers. Okay. All right, let's keep reading and finish it off. Verse 19, he struck down some of the men of Beth Shemesh because they had looked down into the ark of the Lord. He had struck down all the people, 50,070 men, and the people mourned because the Lord had struck the people with a great slaughter. The men of Beth Shemesh said, who is able to stand before the Lord, the holy God, and to whom shall he go up from us? So they sent messenger to the inhabitants of Kiriath Jearim, saying, the Philistines have brought back the ark of the Lord. Come down and take it up to you. I see a hand. Okay. Verse 19. Did anyone translation say something different?
He struck some of the men of Beth Shemesh because they looked upon the ark of the Lord. He struck 70 men of them, and the people mourned because the Lord had struck the people with a great blow.
And what translation is that?
ESV.
ESV. So the ESV reads 70 men. Mm-hmm. This is the New American Standard. It reads 50,070 men. The NIV reads 70 men. The King James reads in Old English 50,070 men. A discrepancy on the translation. And that's a big difference, right? That's not plus or minus a few. That's plus or minus 50,000. So what's going on there? And that's why I had my notes on this somewhere else. And I guess I lost them. And it really comes down to an issue of translation on some of the manuscripts. So typically what translators try to do is translate as best they can from what you can call the Masoretic text, the original oldest Old Testament manuscripts. But the reason there's a difference there is because the oldest one here does say something along the lines of this, but some of the manuscripts found only mention 70 men. And it comes down to the awkwardness of the Hebrew, and man, I really wish I didn't lose my notes on that, but let me read it again. He struck down all of the people, 50,070 men, and the people murdered, and the people mourned because the Lord had struck down the people with a great slaughter. Basically what happened is some of the manuscripts only say 70, while some of the other ones say 50,000. And it's the translator trying to reconcile which one is right. Some have said it had to be 70 because this town of Beth Shemesh probably wouldn't have had 50,000 people living in it, and that's a fair assumption. And it says 50,000 was slaughtered there, that from God slaughtering the people. So evidently it may have been even more. The phrase though there, the people mourned because the Lord had struck them with a great slaughter. The people mourned there is the same phrase used in chapter 4 when 30,000 people Hebrew soldiers were slaughtered in battle. So if the same phrase mourned because of the great slaughter was used in the same places, it would seem weird that it would be used to describe the death of 70 people on one sense, but 30,000 on the other sense. So those on the side that this text says 50,000 would say no, it really should be 50,000 because the people mourned of a great slaughter. So it's interesting. It kind of comes down to doing a little bit of homework. That's your assignment. Come back next week and we'll talk about it more. But the point is this: whether it was 50,000 or 70, the point is the Lord struck them down. Why? Because they had looked into the ark of the Lord. They are not allowed to do that. Again, only the Levites were able to touch, handle, and look into the ark. They knew that. And whether it was out of excitement that the Ark of the Covenant was back or whatever, they were flippant with this thing, which is a holy object. God is a holy God, and his holiness killed 70 people or 50,000, and the people mourned because the Lord had struck them with a great slaughter. And the reaction in verse 20, who is able to stand before the Lord, this holy God, and to whom shall he go up from us? That is the reaction there. The holiness of God when we treat it flippantly, when we're casually about it, in this case, he killed 50,000 men. And the reaction is, who is able to stand before the Lord, this holy God? So they send messengers to Kiriath Jearim, and they say, the Philistines have brought back the ark. Come down and take it up to you. You remember, the ark used to be in Shiloh. Shiloh appears to have been gone at this point. And some evidence points to that fact. You remember, Shiloh was where the tabernacle was located. It was where Samuel was trained to be a priest as a young boy. Why not return it there? It could have been that in the prior battle in chapter 5, when the Israelites were slaughtered, 30,000, the Philistines may have destroyed the town of Shiloh. Jeremiah and the Psalms mention the destruction of Shiloh, as well as some archaeological excavations confirming the city was destroyed by fire in around the mid-11th century BC. So Shiloh appears to have been gone and is never mentioned again. So they send the ark back to Kiriath Jearim, and they say the Philistines have brought it back. Come down and take it. Anyone have final thoughts or questions? Reflections?
I kind of get out of this that you can see in this 2 chapters how God is both merciful and just at the same time. You know, the Philistines did the best they could, and God showed them mercy that they were trying.
Mm-hmm.
But then he still shows that he is just when the Israelites blatantly disobeyed him.
Yeah. That's a great point.
It seems like he was harsher with his chosen people than with the pagans.
Because they knew.
Yeah.
They had them. They knew what they were supposed to do.
Yep.
I think that, I don't know, looking at the numbers, like the discrepancies in the translations, I mean, I think it'd be difficult for 50,000 people to all see what was inside of the ark in that short period of time than just 70.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, like, I think 70 is a bit more like,
Realistic.
Yeah, I know
Yeah.
that too.
like, I mean, because that's the reason that they were punished.
Mhm.
That was their transgression that they were punished for. I don't think that 50,000, 70 people all, you know, I'm sure that at least some among that number would be like, we were told not to do this.
Right.
Well, if it's just 70, then that'd be more.
That's a good point. Yeah.
Seems also that the punishment that God gave his own people was much greater than the punishment he gave to the Philistines. He just gave them boils, but he killed the Israelites.
Mm-hmm.
For whatever that's worth, I mean, there is some rationale there, if you want to look at it, that our responsibility as God's people is much greater than the rest of the world, and
Yeah.
the punishment for not doing
Yeah.
would be great.
Yep.
Well, the good thing that the men who did not die, the Philistines got the tumors. So obviously there was death happening.
Probably, it doesn't say, but yeah.
I don't say what the magnitude of it was, but still, I mean, they're not being judged on physical. Like you say, it's on everybody's heart.
Hmm.
Whether you're worshiping God or an idol. It seems like you know something was amiss when you're worshiping an idol. There's just something amiss.
Yeah. I think the biggest thing is God is very serious about his holiness and his glory, and the Ark of the Covenant was a representation of that. And it doesn't end here. In 1st and 2nd Samuel, there are other cases where the people are flippant toward the Ark, and they treat it casual or as a good luck charm, or they don't treat it with the reverence that the Ark deserves. And in order to get kind of a good indication of that, maybe go home this week and read in Exodus and in some of the Torah how God described the Ark, the detail he describes it in, as well as how it should be treated, how it should be looked upon, how far back the people have to be from it, how it needs to be carried from place to place. It's an extraordinary detail because God is so concerned, he's so detailed about the Ark, about his own holiness, about his own glory, and when the people of God are just casual to it and flippant to it, it offends him. You know, obviously we don't have the ark today. You often wonder what did happen to it. It really just disappeared from the pages of
You
history.
see the movie, it's in a government warehouse.
Yeah, apparently, yeah. Yep. It's never been confirmed, but maybe we should do it. We should go and confirm it. But we don't have the ark today, but we still have, you know, the living God is still there today, and we worship him one day a week. And it is a lesson to us, although we don't have the ark, we shouldn't be flippant about God in whatever area of our life that may look like.
How do the Jewish people today atone for their sins if they don't have the ark, the temple, the sacrificing?
Well, you know, there are Jewish people today who want to build another temple because of that exact problem. Because after,
So they want to actually sacrifice animals again?
yeah, yep, it's a small sector, but there are some who are, they go to the Israeli government with plans as to build another temple, build a holy of holies, sacrifice animals. Yep.
And wait for the Messiah.
What's that?
And wait for the Messiah.
Yep.
Pity.
Yep. All right. Well, let's close in prayer, and we'll be done for today.